And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bubba the Bat Flip, episode 151, wrapping up our reviews of our positional previews for the 2023 fantasy baseball season, going to starting pitching. And it's only fitting. It's our final episode of the reviews of the previews, starting pitchers. So that'll be fun. We've got some ADP debates. We're using the main event ADP. There's been 8 main event drafts, as everyone predicted. Pitching's got up, folks. That's the way it's going. But before we get into all that, the housekeeping. You can find myself on Twitter at BDentric and my co-host is always on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how are we doing, my friend?
Doing great, Bubba. Although we did lose in the Battle of the Pods, but Sweet 16 is pretty nice.
It's pretty good.
For a small conference school like us,
Yeah.
We'll take that. We'll take that Sweet 16 berth. Congrats to Ariel and Beat the Shift for taking us down today. But no, I mean, it's super exciting. I mean, we're getting to it, right? We're a little over a week away. The WBC has been fantastic. I saw a tweet that was like, how is the MLB season ever going to compare to, the WBC? So yeah, another great game today and a good final tomorrow. So should be enjoyable. It's baseball season. Gotta love it.
Yep, USA Japan Tuesday night's going to be so much fun because honestly, when it started, I was watching Team USA. I'm like, this team might not even get out of the pool play. Like, it did not look like a great baseball team, and they're clicking right now. The pitching's still not great, and that's my biggest concern. It's not a great pitching staff, but boy, oh boy, can they score some runs? So should be fun.
Yeah. Who's starting tomorrow? Do you know?
It's probably been announced. I'm not sure. I know Lance Lynn. Or no, I think it might be Lance Lynn because Wayno started. Hopefully, it's not Merrill Kelly because I think he started the game 3 in the pool play, and that could be disastrous. Maybe it's a bullpen game. Maybe it's straight up like Game 7 World Series. Here we go.
Who's going to be the opener?
Yeah, this could be like a one-time through the rotation for you, Merrill, and then we're going to the pen. That could be the scenario, but we'll see. It reminds me so much. Like, you probably watched it when you were growing. Maybe you still watch it now. I don't know. But like watching the Little League World Series, and it was always like you have the USA side and you have the international. And USA was always putting a good team together, but it seemed like it was always like Japan would get through to the finals and just beat the snot out of the whatever USA team showed up more often than not, because they're just a fundamentally sound team. Like, that's just what they do. And so I'm really curious to see how Tuesday night goes. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's all I know. So
for sure, it is. It's going to be really interesting. It's going to be interesting to see that ADP of Ishida. So
yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. That's a good point. And everyone's already drooling over Sasaki, who won't even be. I don't think he's coming to like 2027. Like, we got a long ways to
like
go
25. I wonder if there's any way for him to get out earlier. Like,
it'd be nice.
I know that's when I think his first contract ends, but man, it'd be nice to have him in the M majors for his whole career. But obviously, I mean, Japan, it's got a great league too. So
we'll see what happens, but it's a lot of fun. Good to see baseball's thriving even in the springtime. So, and then, like you said, you're going to be in Vegas this weekend because the second round of big live main event drafts and everything are taking off. And then 1 week after that, we have our final spring games, and then it's baseball season. It's right here. It's right around the corner. So it's going to be glorious, absolutely glorious. And looking forward to next week hearing your thoughts on how your NFBC weekend went in Vegas. That'll be a lot of fun to see.
I'm sure I will have a lot of stories.
Because what are you doing? You're doing 3 or 4 teams?
I'm doing 4 in Vegas, 3 auctions and 1 main on Saturday morning. So, and that's a fun group. That's a fun group for sure in there. So
that'll be a good one.
Yeah, it'll be a good time.
So yeah, looking forward to hearing all about that. But for tonight, we are talking starting pitchers, main event ADP, which is I put from 316 to today. It's been 8 drafts Saturday and Sunday. That's pretty much what you got. And it's definitely some surprises. Like, if you want to listen to the Sunday night RotoWire podcast, Toby filled in for Jeff Erickson with Scott Jenstead, and they talked a lot about these ADP kind of movers and shakers per se, because they're both, Scott was running for the overall for a while there last year. He was doing some big boy things, and Toby's always got some squads in the mix. So they were having some fun conversations in that. But Toby, let's talk about a couple standouts. The least that just stood out just from the naked eye without going super deep into ADP with this first look. And for me, the first one off the board is Spencer Strider. He's the 4th pitcher off the board of an ADP of 16.75, which is just like on the 1-2 turn. And he went as high as 12, so he went in the first round in one of these 8 drafts. And this is a guy that was going, back like a more of a 2-3-ish kind of guy for most of draft season, depending on the 12s and 15s on how that was going for you. So to see him jump up to a first-round pick and on the 1-2 turn, that is quite the healthy jump. So how are you kind of looking at Spencer Strider? Like, are you surprised by the jump? Is it definitely taking him off the board for you? If he was on your board, he probably wasn't, but if he was, how is Spencer Strider's just push up the rankings going for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, it's fascinating to see, the kind of ADP close and who's moving up and who's moving back. Like, it's really interesting because a lot of it honestly like mirrors the projections in a lot of ways, like where the projections have guys going, which is kind of fascinating. But for Strider, I mean, I think nobody really questions the skills for Strider. I mean, skills, like, projections are in agreement on Strider. We've seen like what he's done. I mean, he had one of the better rookie seasons ever for a pitcher. There's the injury concerns towards the back end of the year, but he's looked good. I mean, he's down like maybe 1.5 miles per hour, I think, something like that on his fastball in the spring, but not too much for concern. You know, like I'm more concerned about when you're hitting 2 miles per hour or more. So it's really a volume question for Strider. And what you think he can hit for volume. If you think he can get to 200 innings pitched, well, I mean, then you're in for a bonanza, right? But I think most of the projection systems have him. Let's see, what do we got? We got 140, we got 168, 159, 151, 154, 122.3. So it really depends on how many innings you put him in for. But I think on a skill basis, he's one of the best pitchers in baseball, clearly. And I think one of the things that you just need to factor in is if you are going to take Strider, I do think that you need to look for volume somewhere else, whether it's in the number of starting pitchers that you're drafting kind of earlier on in the draft, or whether you're just kind of backing him up right away with somebody who's a 200, 180 inning guy. He'll get you the Ks, but the question will be kind of more of the volume metrics and, potentially the wins. I mean, it's a great team with a really good bullpen, but, he hasn't really gone deep into games consistently. So, we'll see. But I do like him. He's good.
Yeah, we share pretty similar sentiments. Like, I love the talent. I love the pitcher. I think there's a lot to like. It's just a matter of how many innings is he going to throw. That's my biggest concern, especially with an early pick like that. You got your Nolas, who's almost a 200, 190 plus guy year after year. You got Woodruff, who, he's been banged up. But you could imagine a healthy season, 175, 180, which does Strider even get there? But his 150 might be as good as Woodruff's 180. So, like, you got those kind of conundrums to take place when you're kind of weighing it out. So it just kind of surprised me in the main event world, who we like to think are the best of the best potentially playing out there. You see that kind of jump in a talent like Strider, who's been, like I said, hanging around like almost 10 to 15 picks later. That's a big jump for me in the early draft picks. DeGrom, he went as high as 17th in one draft. Verlander as high as 16th, but as low as 34. So it's a wide array based on these early drafts on who goes where. So it is interesting to see when some of these guys are kind of getting pushed up and some aren't per se. Like Nola's just like stuck in 21 to 29. He's just a second round dude, where other guys have, first to third round potentials depending on where you're looking in the draft. And it just kind of gives you an idea of, I guess, the landscape as you're looking at it.
Another guy. I have some breaking news.
Uh-oh. What happened?
The main event for tonight shut down. So we have the board from tonight's main event. There's now 9 drafts in the system.
Let me reload this page and see if I get a ninth draft. So
let me just, I'll tell you what the first couple rounds were. And I don't know who they are. I don't have that board. I just have so we got Turner at 1. What we call that the WBC bump.
Yep.
Acuna at 2, Judge at 3, J-Ram at 4, nothing surprising. J-Rod at 5, Ohtani at 6, Tucker at 7, nothing surprising. Bichette continues his move up. Yep. He goes 8th. Witt 9. Number 10, Tatis Jr. Number 11, Mr. Freddie Freeman.
Still no pitchers.
Yeah. Corbin Burns is the first pitcher off the board.
At 12.
12. Machado at 13. Vlad Jr. at 14, Juan Soto at 15, which is interesting because, he's got the oblique injury, right? So that's kind of fascinating there. Garrett Cole at 16.
Okay.
Mookie Betts at 17. Mike Trout at 18. Pete Alonso at 19. And this is one we're seeing a little bit more consistently. Justin Verlander at 20.
Interesting.
Which is his ADP since the first day. His ADP is solidly at 20 through the first day. Then you got Goldie, who was falling, but not in this draft. And then you have Strider at 22, DeGrom at 23, Yordan at 24, Austin Riley at 25, who's been dropping a little bit, Clase at 26, Nola at 27, Seager at 28, McClanahan at 29, Devers at 30. Now that is a fascinating little, you're not going to see that very often, where you get Trey Turner at 1 and Rafael Devers at 2, and then you hit up Max Scherzer at 3.
That's a heck of a start.
That's got to feel pretty good.
That's pretty amazing. That's why it's fun looking at some of those boards, and right there, you said Strider went 22 or 23 after we just said he's gone as high as 12. He had as low as 22. That's his low. So. That's it says a lot right there. That shows the volatility or variance in his ADP, and that's just it. And then all the hitters early on there kind of I wouldn't say getting pushed up per se, but Machado up to 13. Not saying he doesn't deserve it, but something you don't see every day.
He's been pushing up. Yeah, he's been pushing up too. It's interesting.
Yeah, so some of those names, and you mentioned Soto with the oblique injury. That's kind of a little scary to still trust him on the 1-2 turn. That's an interesting selection. So yeah, that's fun. Going to be fun to see where the next groups of mains go, and this ADP continues to fluctuate, because definitely consistency in the ADP, but definitely one thing I noticed this morning, and with the Strider is 12 to 22, the variance, Verlander 16 through 34, McClanahan 26 through 41. So it's not like there's Nola from 21 to 29 is a pocket where the rest of them are just spread out, where it's all over the board. And even when you read off the first 2 rounds there, it intermixed a lot of the starting pitcher compared to the ADP. If you just look at the sheet, they weren't down in order per se, which you'd expect. But so yeah, interesting stuff there. See, Toby's doing all this research. He's got some big stuff coming up. He's got to be ready for the movers and shakers.
You got to know everybody who's moving around. I mean, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's an interesting board. Some people took some interesting approaches on it. So, and what's fascinating to me is Burns has kind of moved. I want to say in mains, he may be the number 1.
He's playing like that.
Yeah. He just went ahead of Cole. Burns is at 12.22 and Cole is at 12.33. Yeah. Fascinating stuff.
One of the things that's really interesting to me is if you just do all the players, I went back to all. You mentioned Bo Bichette went I think it was 8 or 9, something that Bo Bichette went 8 or 9 or something, but he's gone as high as 4.
Already. Yeah, that was Bob from Utola. Yeah. He
saw that.
Kind of announced that.
He's on Team Bo, which says a lot. He's got bumped up because he's got the 4 to 12 situation. But yeah, Vlad 8 through 19, so Vlad's fallen to 19 in some. Tatis, the pick 10 was the highest so far. Machado 11 through 22, Freeman 11 through. So there's some gaps there as well. But Yordan's falling quite a bit with that hand injury. That's scaring people, because his highest is 18th. And earlier in draft season, he was a pretty easy 10 to 12, give or take, maybe a little higher. So he's fallen pretty good as well, which is something to he's supposed to start playing grapefruit games this week. They're not too worried about him, it sounds like. So we'll see. But main event drafters are.
Yeah, Scott actually asked me about Yordan on the pod yesterday, on the RotoWire pod. And I didn't have his profile in front of me. I was a little bit of a slacker, but Scott had mentioned how he had really dipped off in the second half. And I took a peek, and his WRC plus during that time was still 170, I think, something like that.
Still a monster.
He was a monster, and his home run per fly ball rate fell down to 17%. And you might be saying oh well, that's still super high. But for Yordan, he's a 25% home run per fly ball guy. So that's, I don't know how much of it was. It could have certainly been the injury, and I didn't look at the ground ball rate, so I probably should do that. Actually, I will do that, just because even though this is the pitcher pod,
Hey, I
we
got no
care about
problem
the
talking
people.
about this stuff because these are questions that I'm getting in like other chat rooms and stuff. Like, what are you doing with Yordan? Like, these are things that are on the minds as we're in the heart of drafts. He's like, I've got a lot of Yordan shares. I do. So I'm trying to act like it's not a big deal because this is a dude that can hit almost 300 and hit over 40 home runs. You don't see that every day. But if there are concerns, it's valid.
Yeah, I mean his ground ball rate was elevated in the second half for sure, but he had similar periods of time in the first half of the season too. If you look at his rolling 80 game average, let's make it more like a 70 game rolling average because that's more like how often he plays. Let's see what we got. Yeah, been pretty consistent. His last 70 games, it was at a high 30s, which is right in line with his 3-year average. So I think it was more. Let's see the home run per fly ball. Again, I'm not really in on Yordan all that much, so I'm not saying this to encourage people to get him or anything like that. But I just felt bad because Scott had asked me about it, and I didn't have it on there. And by the time I got it up, he had moved on to the next thing. So this was his. Yeah, it was tied for his lowest 70 game rolling average home run per fly ball with the end of the previous season as well. So again, it doesn't mean definitively that it wasn't the injury that, kept him from producing as much power in the second half, but everything else looked really good. Like he was still a phenomenal player.
One of the craziest things you mentioned out of all of that is the fact that when in the beginning of the season, 1 out of every 4 fly balls went out of the ballpark. That is just insane to think about. When you think about it, you could go to a game and he hits 4 fly balls, there's a good chance one of them left the park. That's nuts. That's absolutely insane. That's how good he was. It's the groove he was in. So yeah, bottom line, ADP, it's fun to see how this is moving and shaking. If you do 12 teams, go look at the OCs. There's so many of those. They do like 6 a day or something. So shrink that one down quickly. Like I think I did a search for like 3 days the other day, and there's 21 drafts in 3 days. So the OCs are flying off the boards. So keep that in mind as well. A couple other pitchers that just kind of I wanted to briefly discuss based on like injury concerns or whatever. When people are kind of asking like, hey, where would you take so-and-so? Carlos Rodon, who there's some maybe more positive news coming out. I'm still kind of skeptical of the situation. But right now, he's the 32nd pitcher off the board. That includes relief pitchers. ADP of 74. He's got as high as 57 in these first 9 drafts. I'm still hesitant to take him, even though I know how good he can be, and that bit me in the rear end a couple years ago. I'm very aware of that. But when he's going around other pitchers, like, Gallen's got his issues right now with velocity, but Framber Valdez, Darvish going right in front of him. I love Robbie Ray going right after him. I'll even take the toe with Joe Musgrove type situation. So how are you looking at Rodon here? He's kind of sandwiched in between those starting pitchers.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in Rodon. I mean, these are golden picks, and so I don't really want to spend a ton of draft capital on him. And so going at ADP of, I think you mentioned 74. Yeah, I'm not willing to go there. I mean, you have the injury history with his arm. I think, last year without having any injuries, he pitched 178. So, the projections are a little bit all over the place on him. I think I have him for 130 innings. I can double check that. But yeah, and I'm not really interested. I just think it's too risky at that point. And certainly he can help win you a league, but he could always also lose it for you. So
yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah.
In a big way. Another starting pitcher that's been moving up draft boards as he continues to throw in the spring and continue to dominate and continue to remind us of the Chris Sale of old. ADP of 101 so far, 41st pitcher off the board. He's gone as high as 81, which is in the Robbie Ray realm of things. Like, you want to talk about a difference in picks, 81 through 130 for Chris Sale, all over the board for Chris Sale. I'm starting to like what I'm seeing. I really liked him at his original ADPs of like 170-ish because I believed he'd be able to kind of be a workhorse, kind of like Verlander was in the past. Now you have to pay for him a little bit. And now he's more of an SP3, hopefully, if not an SP2 if you waited. How are you looking at the Chris Sale thing as, missing the season due to Tommy John, but he's older, velocity looks good. They should just let him run because they don't have a lot of choices in Boston.
Yeah, I'm not super into Sale at this moment in time. Um, Again, questions around the injury, how much he's going to pitch. In the last 4 seasons, the most innings he's thrown is 158 back in 2018. So you got to think that that's probably the cap, but I think you're much more likely looking at, 130, and the projections seem to be pretty on board with that as well. You can't really deny the skills, but he's also struggled a little bit, right? Like in 2019, he had 147 innings at a 4.40 ERA. A decent amount of bad luck, but he had home run issues. In 2021, 42.2 innings, but yet again, 1.27 home runs per nine. And that's not really something that he dealt with throughout his whole career. And so I think you're seeing kind of a different pitcher. Does he have upside? Oh, for sure. But I wonder what the upside is at 130 innings. Maybe I'll be like eating crow on that one like later on in the year. But for me, I don't want to get a guy who's going to throw 130 innings at pick 101. If I think a guy's going to go 130 innings and I want to go after him, I'm going to draft Clayton Kershaw, who's going after that. So better team, better ratios. Maybe not the same strikeout upside, but again, we don't know what we're getting from Chris Sale, right? He hasn't pitched in a couple seasons. So, and how late is he going to go into games? All of those types of questions.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one to see his climb up boards this draft season and really climbing up here in the main event. And the last guy I had written down here was Kyle Wright of the Atlanta Braves. He got a slow start to spring. To me, I compare it to the way Zach Wheeler was treated last year. It could be totally different. It sounded like just kind of a dead arm shoulder situation. There's like no damage, and he's throwing fine now. We'll see. Time will tell. He might miss it. Looks like he's gonna miss a couple starts, similar to Zach Wheeler. Could be just totally wrong here, but he seems like he is taking a bit of a hit here on this one. ADP of 154. He's on as high as 121, as low as 172. And you got Luis Garcia, Jomo, Reed Detmers, even Dustin May going ahead of him. So
Reed Detmers.
Yeah, Reed Detmers. He's climbing.
Reed Detmers.
We got a Reed Detmers situation coming up on the show.
We got a Reed Detmers situation.
But with Kyle Wright, it seems like Chris Sale gets the bump up. Strider's getting the bump up. Rodon's kind of sitting around. Kyle Wright looks like he's actually getting a bit of a hit with this injury situation. How are you looking at him?
Yeah, I'm not super interested in Wright. I wasn't like super interested to begin with. He was not nearly as good in the second half as he was in the first half. Generated a lot of his value. I mean, not a lot of his value, right? He had a fantastic season, right? 3.19 ERA, 1.16 WHIP. That's really good. So I don't want to take that away from him. He had the 21 wins as well. It was just one of those seasons where kind of everything went well for the guy. But and I'll just pull up his second half just so I'm not talking out of my butt. But I remember having him on a couple teams last year, and he was a little debatable, that second half of the year. So yeah, over his last 10, the in zone contact rate jumped up to 87%, so worse than league average. His O swing was really solid, which for him is really important. I mean, walks have always been kind of an issue, and he actually had a much better O swing towards the second half of the season. But I think kind of he was all over the place still. His walk rate increased to 7.2%, which is right around league average for starters. K rate was below league average at 22.8%. Swinging strike rate fell to 11.3%. Again, he could go back to his numbers last year, but the fact that he's injured early on, the fact that I think he was probably playing above his actual skill level, for those reasons, he had a 78.9% strand rate, which is not outrageous in today's game, but for a guy who doesn't strike out a ton of players, is certainly beneficial. 16.4% K minus walk rate over the full season. Very solid, but not exceptional. So I wasn't really interested in Wright to begin with, and still am not really.
Perfect. Any other standouts to you on ADP, or would you like to do some ADP debates?
Oh God, standouts.
Or surprises,
I
I
wonder
guess.
how many. Let me just see. I'm trying to think. Yeah, Detmers was one guy. I mean, we're going to talk about him later, so I won't detail that. But he's kind of the biggest mover of everybody. Just looking here for some, it's just the overall story of starting pitching, moving up. Freddie Peralta, I feel like, has moved up a decent amount as well.
Up to 133.
Yeah, Alex Cobb is in the 13th round. Yep. So he's up about 40 spots as well. So again, like, it's nothing surprising. Like, the guys who people like, the guys who are showing skills either in spring training or last year that were encouraging, are starting to move up those boards. And so it's fascinating to see how each draft is unique in the way it runs. Like today, pitching actually didn't move up that much. And it was interesting to see what the draft board looks like when that happens. But like tomorrow there will be one where there's 4 guys who go in the first round, right? So really fascinating to see those movements. But yeah, let's move on.
All righty, let's head to some ADP debates, and we'll have some, just tough pick your poison ones at the top of the draft. And as we go down, these will all be within the top 200 of ADP so far in the main event. And we'll start with Aaron Nola at ADP 25.33 and Justin Verlander at 25.89. I mentioned earlier how Nola's going anywhere from 21 to 29, where Verlander is going as high as 16 and as low as 34. So there's a little more volatility in there. You got Verlander coming off the Cy Young year, goes to New York now, his first year after Tommy John and the Cy Young. And you got Nola, who's just, steady Eddie to me. So how do you kind of debate these two potentially if you're in a draft room?
Yeah, I mean, this is a debate I'm still having with myself, about these two, because I do really like them. I mean, they're both really great pitchers. For Verlander, you feel pretty good about the ERA. He's in a great stadium again. He's that high fly ball pitcher. He keeps the BABIP supremely low consistently, which helps his whip because he also doesn't walk guys. So even when he does give up homers, they're generally solo shots. He is playing for the Mets, and man, the way this Mets season is going, who knows what's going to end up happening. But I feel pretty good about the ratios. With Verlander, I think the bigger question mark to me, I think we talked about it in the preview or the review, is the strikeout skills. They didn't match up with what we were seeing there, but he's looked good this spring as well. And he's another season away from Tommy John, still within that kind of window of relative lack of concern. So that's nice. So I feel like you probably are getting better ratios with Verlander. You're probably getting fewer strikeouts. You're probably getting similar wins to Nola. With Nola, he's got the volume, so he's got the innings pitched. The ERA has been the whip has been pretty strong consistently. The ERA has been fluctuating a little bit, somewhat homer prone occasionally, but helped out by the better ball as well. The strikeouts, I feel like in volume, are going to be there as well. So I think it really just depends, what you're going to do. I think it's fascinating that they're going side by side in ADP, because I think you got to be happy if you get either one of them. But I think you go either way. I think it's more about, like, if you draft Nola, maybe you go in a different direction later on. If you draft Verlander, maybe you go in a different direction later on. Like, it's kind of goes down to that rotation construction and where you're getting your Ks, where you're getting your ratios, things like that. So I honestly, like, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I had decided. I imagine, I've got 4 drafts this weekend. I imagine I will have both of them on one team, probably. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's why it's a tough one for me, because I love Nola. So for me, if I have to pick one of the two, it's Nola, mainly because the consistency of innings and whatnot. Even though I believe Verlander's still going to give you a ton of innings, there's still the concern. First year first full season after Tommy John now, so it's year 2 of that. They talk about the honeymoon period, all those scenarios. Ratios will be great, strikeouts will be great with Verlander, like you said. Just Nola is just a consistent. He's going to go out there and give you the innings. 205, 180, 202, 212. He's just a beast in that department. Strikeouts will still be there. Just can you limit the home runs, like you said? Because the ratios, it's a combination of Phillies have bad defense type situation, and he's that guy that I think people just don't like him because he has those great starts with one bad inning all the time, and just people remember that stuff with Nola. I go Nola over these two. I have both throughout my drafts. I've done a lot of drafts, so I have both. earlier in draft season, Nola was going much later than Verlander. You could almost get both if you wanted to. Now that they're going like side by side, it's a really interesting situation. And I guess it goes to show you in a 15-team format where a lot of my drafts were 12, that stability of Nola is much more valuable per se than just going YOLO with a Verlander and hoping for the ceiling again. There's a difference in that regard. So I go Team Nola in this one. That's my decision, but very, very close. And it's very interesting to me that they're neck and neck in ADP right now. That was a big surprise to me going forward. All right, we dropped down a little farther. A guy that still just does not get the respect somehow I think he deserves, but maybe I'm just crazy. Kevin Gausman, ADP of 44.67, as high as 38. Luis Castillo, ADP of 46.89, ADP as high as 35. How do you look at these two in an ADP debate?
Yeah, for me in an ADP debate, this is kind of a tough one too. I lean Gausman in this one. You know, I don't know. It's just these are all tough ones, right? Like they're all going around each other for reasons. With Gausman, you know, there's like maybe a little bit of luck on some things last year, maybe a little bit of luck on some things, a little bit of bad luck on other things. You know, I love the fact that he doesn't walk a lot of guys. He generates that really high O swing. But Luis Castillo has been pretty similar. And I mean, the Mariners know what they're doing. And so, like, when I look at Castillo's last 10, 81.2% in zone contact, 35.1% O swing, 28.9% K minus walk or K rate, 5.9% walk rate. So, really getting those walks, you know, under control when he went over to the Mariners, you know, so that's 22% K minus walk. 14.2% swinging strike. So all of those numbers are really good. Like you've got to like those. And what's interesting about Castillo as well is that, you know, that was with his changeup getting worse last year. You know, his changeup, the swinging strike rate on his changeup, and for those of you that follow this pretty closely, like 12.9%. You know, this is a guy that 2 years ago had a changeup with a 22.8% swinging strike rate, 26.7%. 26.1%. You know, like that to me is fascinating, right? So maybe there's the next level for Castillo there, but I also like haven't been that into him, honestly. Like I haven't really gone after him that closely. And then Gausman, like you look at him too, and then he's playing for a really good Jays team, you know, it's going to score a lot of runs. Win should be there. Some questions about like the stadium a little bit. But let me just get my handy dandy thing here and look over the same period for Gausman as Luis Castillo. And you are going to get, you got 83.9% in zone contact. You got 41.3% O swing. I mean, that's ludicrous. You know, a 41% O swing, like you're just not going to walk dudes doing that, right? When almost half of the pitches you throw outside the zone are swung at. And that really means that most of the pitches that are anywhere near the zone are swung at, right? Because there's always the ones that are just kind of wasted pitches. You got a K rate at 28.7. You've got a 15.2% swinging strike rate. You got a 3.4% walk rate, right? So you got a 25% K minus walk. I mean, both of those guys, those are all elite numbers for them. So again, I think I lean Gausman just because he hasn't had the same, at least recent struggles that Castillo has. I worry a little bit about the cold weather narrative with Castillo as well. Remember, he really struggled in Cincinnati, and he's in Seattle, and Seattle's not super cold. I mean, I lived there for a while, but
and they can close the roof.
It's also not super.
Right?
It's not super room. It's sort of super warm either, right? Like it's not going to really get there for a little bit. So it's pretty far up there. If you look at that, whatever that is, longitude or latitude, the latitude, I always mix them up. So, but yeah, I think they're both good pitchers. I would think I'd lean Gausman there.
Yeah, it's Gausman for me, and I love Luis Castillo. We've talked about him for years on this show, and I don't think I have very many shares at all this year. I have a lot of shares of Kevin Gausman. A couple of reasons why is I love, again, this is just nitpicky because, like you said, they're neck and neck, but to me, Gausman's got the better overall team per se, given the Mariners will be much better this year. But I just like Gausman, what we've seen over and over for the last 4 out of 5 years, even if you want to. The ratios have been good. The strikeouts have been really good for 4 straight seasons. He limits the walks. The ball stays in the ballpark. There's just so many factors that just consistency that I really, really like, and he seems to just do it over and over again. Where Castillo with the Mariners is the dream we've always wanted, get out of Great American Small Park, and he was just amazing outside of there. He's always been pretty good, but the whip's been a concern with Castillo, and the walks went down a bit more. Like you said, the Mariners know what they're doing. He's throwing a lot more in the zone and all those little things, but he still had a pretty healthy walk rate overall. And then, if he can continue to improve on that, that's great. But the ground ball rate dropped a ton last year. That used to be like his forte, get a bunch of ground balls and strikeouts with the changeup. It just didn't happen as much last year. So it makes you wonder, sure, he can let the ball elevate more in Seattle than he couldn't in Great American. So maybe that zone contact you mentioned, hey, go for it. Let it rip. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. I love Luis Castillo. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge fan of Luis Castillo. I just feel like Gausman's got like a Cy Young ceiling where Castillo's got a very good ceiling. Like Gausman can be one of those guys we look back at the end of the season, like you look at the player rater or something, and he's a top 5 starting pitcher, and no one would be surprised just because he's got that arsenal. Where Castillo becoming a top 5 starting pitcher might surprise a few people. So it's just that it's picking at straws to me, and that's what it is. So I go Kevin Gausman in this one. No problems with Luis Castillo, but it's Gausman for me. All right, the next one, this one I'm really curious to see where you go with this one. And this kind of had some movers in ADP, actually. Dylan Cease, ADP at 55.22. Julio Urias, 57.56. Cease had the amazing season last year. Still some concerns with potential walk situations. Where Julio Urias maybe doesn't get you the innings, but does get you the strikeouts and a whole bunch of wins with the Doyers. So how do you look at Dylan Cease and Julio Urias?
Yeah, neither of them have really been a target for me this year at all. Cease is actually showing up pretty well when I look at just valuations, but I worry about the walks. Like we talked about it before, so I won't belabor it, but he walks a lot of guys. I think he led the league actually in number of walks issued, and part of that was because he went pretty far into games and threw a lot of innings. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can go back there. I feel like I made out really well last year, and I worry that we're going to be back in the 2021 range. I mean, maybe slightly better than that, but we'll see. But still, like a really good pitcher. Maybe I'm just being outrageous. I don't know, but the projections he has right now are not terrible, right? Like 3.59, or the bat has him at that's the worst one. So let's just go with Steamer 3.74, 1.22, 227 strikeouts. That's pretty good. The ERA maybe not what you want, but otherwise. And then Urias, like I always want to like him. Like the theory of Urias is interesting. Like he's always good, but I also struggle a little bit with, the fact that the skills don't necessarily support it. And that's a little bit challenging. And last year seemed to really be like kind of the best of all the worlds for him. So I'm probably skipping out on both of them. If I had to take one guy, probably went into this thinking Cease, and I'd probably I went in with it going Urias, and I'd probably go back to Cease. But
yeah, that's the conundrum I have. That's why I wanted to bring this one up to see what you had to say on this one. And we talked about this one at Barf. This is what I hit home. Like, I am not a Dylan Cease guy, but he fell to like 77 or something. And I was like, okay, well, that's like when you look at projections and everything, like he blows whatever's left out of the water in that scenario. So yeah, Dylan Cease, come on down. But there's this very smart guy that I know named Toby G. And he's always warned me about my whip issues on teams. And because of certain guys I like. And Dylan Cease is a red flag for the whip situation. Like he had a 1.11 last year, by far the best of his career, but that was a lot due to the amount of innings he pitched, as Toby mentioned. Otherwise, he's like a 1.25, 1.3, maybe more type dude. And a lot of the projections have him around more like that 1.25 guy. At this point in the draft, you can't really, to me, afford that kind of a whip. Like that comes later in the draft because you don't have a choice type situation.
Yeah, I like the way you're talking.
Like that's one thing I've been really trying to focus on that Toby's instilled in my head. Like, hey, look at these. That's maybe another reason why the Castillo versus Gausman thing for me. Like, because Castillo's always been a high whip guy, not so much last year, but let's do it a few times. So I get really nervous with Dylan Cease, but then there's the Julio Urias, and we talked about it in the previews that maybe I need to get this biasy out of my head with Urias. Like, he doesn't pitch a ton of games, blah, blah, blah. Still with 175 innings, 185 the year before. Doesn't rack up a ton of strikeouts. He's almost like a mini Alcantara. He needs the innings to be relevant, but you're not paying the premium like you are with Alcantara, and you get a whole lot of wins. Given Dodgers aren't going to be as good this year, I have a feeling. Just a hunch, and that's not my Giants biasy. That's just us looking at this team. It's not the Dodgers of old. Let's put it that way. So that's why this was an interesting one to me, seeing them next to each other. It's like two completely different pitching profiles, but both had great years last year. So it's like, do you see them stay the same? Do you see them take the jump, or do you see them fall back to kind of maybe what we expect them to be? That's the conundrum at this point in the draft. I'll take Urias from this one because I think there's a little more consistency there than with Dylan Cease, but it's not a warm and fuzzy thing. I don't have many shares of either one. I don't think I have any Urias, to be honest, which is crazy. And like I said, that Cease is only because he fell so much, and it just became a point where I was willing to take the chance at that time. Could be wrong. But yeah, give me Julio Urias in this one. And it's not a great one, but it was an interesting discussion seeing where they're going in drafts right now. Another one that's kind of moving around is you got, and they switched spots after this last draft because Yu Darvish was going ahead of Alek Manoah, but now Alek Manoah is a pick ahead of Yu Darvish at 68.11, and Yu Darvish is at 69.11, so they're a pick apart in drafts. Manoah doing Manoah things, velocity down a bit this spring. And you got Darvish, who's pretty darn awesome, and it's kind of each year goes a little farther down in ADP as he gets older, but still kind of produces. So how do you look at Manoah and Yu Darvish?
Yeah, I'll go with Darvish on Darvish. I'll go with what I'm used to saying is Darwin Nunez, who is the Liverpool striker. I'll go with Darvish on this one pretty clearly. I think Manoah is of no interest to me whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I've been so anti-Manoah, and people love him. And the drop in strikeouts last year, a ton more innings. The ratios were great, but you look at the indicators, not so much. I just have a lot of concerns with Alek Manoah, and hey, prove me wrong, kid, if you want. Where Darvish just does it year after year for me. So, and he's on a really good team. So yeah, I'm 100% with you. The reason I brought this one up is because to me, this one's not as close as I think people are making it to be. And maybe that's just my thing, but you kind of seem to have the same mindset on this as well. But like I said, when I made this list before this last draft, there was the flip-flops, and Manoah's overtaken him. So it's an interesting development here. And a lot of smart people like Manoah. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'll take Darvish over Manoah as well. Robbie Ray, a guy that I am insanely high on this year, and not just because what he's doing in spring. This was before spring. ADP of 81.56, and you got Tristan McKenzie coming off a monster season. Some people really, really love the kid Sticks, as they call him, because he looks like he sticks wearing baseball pants. How do you look at these two come draft day?
Yeah, these ones are interesting. Ray is fascinating. Ray and Detmers actually they're similar to me because they're both in a situation where their velo is up on according to everything except for any StatCast data. They haven't pitched in front of StatCast data yet, right? And so I always want to see these things because I don't know, like they're like he's 96 to 97, and it's like, okay, well, is that like 95.5, to 94.5 to 95.5, or is that whatever? So with Ray though, I mean, the real glowing reports in spring training. So have piqued my interest a little bit, at least. And I think if you're thinking about like a team that goes for somebody who doesn't get a ton of Ks earlier on, maybe he's a guy that you go to later on. I think the challenge is he's also in kind of a group of players that's a really intriguing hitters as well, and some of your last closers too. So for that reason, I am interested in Ray. I don't know whether I'm going to go as high as it is right now. Tristan McKenzie is also really interesting. I mean, he was incredibly good towards the end of last year. Generates a really nice O swing, which keeps the walk rate low. He really, I want to say he got much better as the season progressed as well in the second half. I hope I'm not making that up. The one thing that concerns me a little bit, he is an extreme fly ball pitcher, and he gives up a ton of hard contact, a ton of barrels. And so I worry a little bit about that, with him. I think oftentimes, though, this is kind of like the zone of non-interest for me, only because I've generally gotten like a few starting pitchers at this point. And so it's tough for me to kind of dip back in here. I'm generally targeting offense here. So I probably won't end up with either one of these guys, but I could see like if they fall a little bit, maybe going after them, or if my pitching doesn't start the same way that I'm expecting, pivoting to a Ray or something like that. I can definitely see that happening. Yeah. So for Tristan McKenzie, the in zone contact was 84.9%. So he can't really beat you in the zone necessarily, but he's got like 40% O swing, which is glorious. He's got a 28.2%, K rate. He's got a 14.4% swinging strike rate, a 4.5% walk rate. It's actually a pretty similar profile to what you're seeing with Kevin Gausman. I keep on saying Gausman, but it's Gausman, right?
Yeah,
I just like really pronouncing that U. So both really interesting to me. I can see why people are interested in them. If I had to pick, I'd probably go with Ray, but I don't know for sure. I'm not 100% on that.
And this is why I wanted to ask it, because it's really close for you where it's not for me, but I understand why it is. Like I look at McKenzie, amazing season last year. He's still so young. Like there is always hope, and people hate the word pedigree for him. Like there was always, he's 25 right now, for crying out loud, to be 26 in August. There was a lot of high expectations for McKenzie, and he kind of had a couple cups of coffee, and we saw some good and some bad. Last year, he really put it all together. He went 191 innings after 120 in 2021. The only concerns I have for him is the innings increase is just a bit concerning. But the other thing is like the strikeout rate dropped a couple percent, but the walk rate dropped a ton too, and that's obviously a big plus. And you mentioned the O swing and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of good and just kind of some slight concerns for me with him. Whereas Robbie Ray, it's just he's doing it year in and year out. It's like 190 plus innings. We talk about a world where we want innings. Boom. Ratios, maybe not elite. Like McKenzie might end up having better ratios. 3.71 last year for Ray at 2.84 in his Cy Young year, but maybe he settles in at a 3.3. That'd be pretty solid if he could do it. If it's a big if, I get it. Would be pretty sweet. Last year's left on base rate was a lot more reasonable compared to his Cy Young season. So maybe last year's more the Robbie Ray we should expect. Also in Seattle, which will be nice. But what I like about Robbie Ray a lot, and he even did it last year, strikeout rate about 27% again for this. He's done that every year since 2016. The walk rate at 8%. The last two seasons, 8%, 6.7. He's not in that 10 to 17%. Just stay in that single digits. I don't care if it's a high 8 or 9. He can survive in that realm, which makes him really good. Obviously, the higher it is, the worse the whip situation goes back to the Dylan Cease thing. But to me, Cease and Ray are two different pitchers in my mind, where like volatility-wise. So I love Robbie Ray. And in a scenario where I might wait on pitching per se, and maybe this is my SP2, unfortunately, I'll take Ray every time because I want that floor that he brings, where Tristan McKenzie has more volatility to me, maybe a higher ceiling in certain categories. But I'll take Robbie Ray. I'm a big Robbie Ray fan. And again, it's not just because of what we're seeing in spring. Spring's been awesome. It's been great to see. Don't get me wrong. But this is a guy I've been very, very high on all draft season. And so to me, it's nice to see the stuff in spring to kind of support his development. But we'll wait and see. All right, a couple more here, and then we'll do some deeper targets and some listener questions. Lance Lynn, pick 115.9. He's been moving up boards compared to his early draft season price, and rightfully so in my mind. Could be the WBC bump that Toby was talking about with some other guys earlier. And then Logan Webb, ADP of 118. This is an interesting one because kind of similar builds if you really look at them, but similar pitchers, but kind of a little different. Depends on how you want to look at it. So how do you look at Lance Lynn versus Logan Webb?
Yeah, I mean, you're picking really good ADP debates, honestly. Lance Lynn, I like more. If you look at what Lance Lynn did in the second half of last year, and he's kind of continued it a little bit in spring, he was really good. Like the K rate wasn't where it was supposed to be. He developed like a true slider. Like he really just had fastballs and a cutter that he was using previously. And that seems to have made him a more effective pitcher. The strikeout rate wasn't out of this world, but the walk rate was really low. His K- walk was over 20%. I think we've talked about it a couple times on the pod, so I won't go too much into it. So I really do like him. I think the White Sox are actually a little bit surprising. Like I think we were all in on them kind of last year in a lot of ways, and a lot of injuries hit them. And, if they can stay healthy, which is a big if. I mean, Eloy was injured today, I think, like just a cramp in his calf or something like that. But, yeah, they still have really good pitchers, and if they can put it all together, they could be really effective. I do like Lance Lynn. Logan Webb's actually pretty interesting. I haven't gone too deep in him, but one thing I'm noticing is just like, later on in the year, he actually did improve pretty dramatically, at least from a skills perspective. He started throwing that sinker again more, and he saw an increase in his strikeout rate. He saw a decrease in his walk rate down to 2.7% over his last 5. The swinging strike rate went up to 11%, which again is not fantastic, but it is very good for him in the way that he pitches extreme ground ball. So a lot of kind of encouraging signs there. But I think I'm going with Lynn. I mean, the one question that I would have, and I guess you could do this for a lot of different pitchers, but like for guys who are drafting Chris Sale, is last year, Logan Webb threw 192 innings with a 2.90 ERA, 116 WHIP, and 163 strikeouts. If Chris Sale gets to 130 innings, will he reach that level of strikeouts? And will he have those ratios? And if so, if not, if the answer to that question is maybe not, like then why?
It's a great question. That's a heck of a way to do it. Let's put it that way. For me, this is an interesting one because I liked it a lot better. Like I said, when Lynn was going farther down, because you can get both these guys. And that was when it was fun for me. You mentioned the improvements from Webb in the second half, and that really stood out to me, not just because I'm a Giants fan and I watched him. Like it was, people say, the strikeouts kept dropping with Webb. It was a pitch mix thing with Webb last year. And you mentioned how the second half he started using the sinker more. It's almost like he started using what was working for him more. And he figured out how to pitch, which I like to see, because if my pitcher doesn't have certain things, I still want him to survive, go 6-7 innings, get the dub. And he was doing that. He started figuring that out. And then he still have starts where the strikeouts were there. So that was good to see with Webb. He's still super young. He's developing. And then what we're seeing this spring is, and we heard reports before spring started, he was working on another pitch. And we've seen that kind of get incorporated this spring. And we've seen velos get a little better because that was a concern, the velo dropping. So it's something to watch. I'm not saying it's the end-all be-all because, the guys can ditch a pitch just as quick as they start to try to throw a pitch. But just the fact he's always trying to reinvent himself. Like last year, he said, "Oh, this isn't working. Let's throw the sinker." Year before, "Hey, fastball's working. Let's strike everybody out." Like he's always willing to reinvent, and I think that's a really great thing to have on a fantasy pitcher, because we've had seasons, and Toby, when certain pitchers like it hits the wall, there ain't no coming back because that's all they have, and that's like a frustrating thing. Where Webb can, maybe a start or two are rough, but then he figures something else out and goes. Lynn on the other side, he had the knee injuries early on. Once healthy, it's just clear how good he was again. It was like he was that dude. And we know he's a workhorse. We know he can throw the innings. Like the strikeouts will be there. It's always scary when he pretty much just throws a fastball 4 different ways. And that's a terrifying thing. But he knows how to do it. He can figure it out. I lean Lance Lynn because I do trust the strikeouts more with Lance Lynn. But Webb is a guy, the reason I wanted to bring this up, because they're close pitchers, but I would not be shocked if we see Webb to be the guy people were drafting last season when he was up in drafts. And then he kind of let people down, so he's kind of dropped again this year. I think he's going to be very, very good. So I've heard a lot of like, "Oh, no, Webb doesn't do this and that." I'm like, no, he does. He does. You just got to pay attention to what he's doing. He's a different, he's a cerebral pitcher. And I think it's a very, very interesting thing to have. So I go Lynn over Webb in this one. I have no problem with either one of these guys. If they land on my team, if like this is an SP3 for me or something, I'm pumped with either one of these guys. Very, very happy. I think they both bring great floors to your team, which helps in a big, big way. All right, let's do one more debate here, and we'll go with Dustin May. This one's like, I don't know, ADP of 141, as high as 121. And then the man you mentioned, Mr. Reed, taking spring training by storm, Detmers, ADP of 141.89, so almost a pick apart, as high as 125. So I'll let you have the floor here, Toby. This is Dustin May, who we don't even know how many innings he's going to throw, and then Reed Detmers, who we saw the second half slider adjustment, and we've seen what he's doing this spring, and the ADP just keeps climbing.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in May. Most innings he's ever thrown in a major league season is 56. I just think the innings are going to be questionable. I think whether he even goes 5 innings on a regular basis. is going to be a little bit of a question as well. I just think that there's a lot of I don't really see it for May. For Detmers, I can see it for sure. I mean, I did a pitcher list thing for PitchCon, and Detmers was above average after he returned from the minors across the board as a pitcher. And so I think the thing for him is going to be like there's reports of a velocity increase from this spring, but he hasn't been measured on StatCast. So I'm a little leery of it, only because I feel like we hear these things all the time. Like, remember Lucas Giolito last year? Lucas Giolito's at 95, 96, 97, And it's like sometimes there's some confusion about whether that was topping out at, in which case you take 3 miles per hour from where they're sitting, right? So like, I'm a little hesitant to believe it, and I think that's generating an overwhelming amount of hype on Detmers. But I also think that if it's legit, I mean, he could be incredibly good. Like we've seen Giolito, it happened to him. It happened to Blake Snell. Like those guys that get that velo bump are the guys that take that to that next level. I just think it's going to be Joey Wentz. That's all I think. No, I'm just kidding. Although Joey Wentz is plus 2 miles per hour on his fastball. Yes, but yeah, so again, I'm not really interested in Detmers where he's going right now. There's going to be some fun bidding on auctions, I think, on Detmers.
Good point.
There's already been some fun betting from some fun stuff from what I've heard in terms of some of those auctions. Him going for more than twice what he was going for before the big auctions hit. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Detmers. I'm not probably going to be playing there. I had him last year for a little bit. Unfortunately, the bad times. But I can see why people are interested, but I'm just not going to go there, I don't think.
Yeah, I'll keep this one short and sweet. I've never been interested on Dustin May. I think he's amazing. I've always said, like, hey, he's going to be a really cool, like he's made for gifts. This is what he does. He's awesome to watch. I'm not interested until I know how many innings the kid's pitching, because like the injuries he's had and the concerns, and even when he was around, they were still like control issues at times last year. Like if guys aren't chasing the slider, there is a lot of question marks. He's electric. I am not doubting that at all. Between these two, I'll take Reed Detmers easily. Now on draft day, like you said, can I pay that price for Reed Detmers? That's a massive problem. That's a major concern on this situation. But like I'm looking at Reed Detmers at say Tout Wars mix auctions. You were asking to see where he'd go. He went for $11 over the weekend, so not too bad. I think he'll be a little higher come your NFBC auctions. Let's put it that way than $11, but that gives you at least a base to go off of. But I'll go Detmers. I'll go for the consistency and the upside there, but it's tough at that price. That's for darn sure. We'll do this one real quick, just because I think it's interesting looking at two young guns getting pushed up draft boards to me. You got Hunter Brown at 172, and we don't know how many innings he's going to throw, versus Grayson Rodriguez at 178. We actually kind of have an idea on how many innings he's going to throw. They've already kind of mentioned that. I'm not really in on either one at their ADPs. If I had to pick one, I'll say I'll take Hunter Brown, just because I think there's maybe more of an upside there. But how do you look at Brown versus Grayson Rodriguez?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really in on either one of them either. I would go with Grayson Rodriguez if I have to choose between the two of them. I just think this stuff is better. And I don't think there's a ton of question about whether he can strike guys out. I think it's just a matter of kind of, how well he'll do hitting the ground running. I'm not really interested in Hunter Brown either. I don't really understand the hype. So last year he did really well in the regular season, in the playoffs, pitching for the Astros, which is great. 20 innings, 22 strikeouts. But when you look below the hood a little bit, right, he's pitching out of the bullpen, right? So he's probably pitching 2 miles per hour higher than he usually does. His swinging strike rate was only 10%. His O swing was 29.5. His in-zone contact was 89.8. He had an 18.8% K- walk rate, gave up 0 home runs in those innings, a 90.9% strand rate. So here's a guy who kind of had everything go well for him. He was pitching out of the bullpen where his stuff is going to play up as is. And I'm not really interested in it. I don't know. But you can also see like the Astros, you know, you want to get pitchers on the Astros, and he's relatively inexpensive as it goes for that. But I just don't see the skills playing up as much. We'll see though.
Yep, we shall see. It'll be fun to watch the young guns and see what the final stats could be. Let's talk about some later targets based on the NFBC main event ADPs 200s through 300. And for you especially, I guess, if you take a couple pitchers early, they take a lot of bats for a while. This might be kind of your wheelhouse here. So don't give away all your tricks, Toby, as you have a big weekend ahead. But who are some of the starting pitchers you're looking at between 200 and 300?
Yeah, I won't give away all my stuff. Don't worry about it. I think there are interesting guys. So like, I'll just kind of run through. Nate Eovaldi is interesting. He's going at 214. He started pitching again. His velo is supposedly up a little bit. Again, haven't seen the StatCast data on it, but he's interesting. He was going all the way back towards the 300s when he was injured earlier this postseason. He plays up really well on the projection systems. They like him a lot. Clark Schmidt has been going up a ton. I liked him a lot more when he was like in the 300s a little bit. Miles Mikolas is a guy I like, kind of slow and steady. You know what you're going to get. I guess he's like a Logan Webb light, maybe, because the ratios generally aren't as good. But he's pretty good. Hayden Wisniewski, I know like everybody loves him. He's pitched really well. He looks like he's going to get the starting job there. So I think that is nice. Let's see. Speaking of Astros starters, Jose Urquidy is interesting as well. Plays nice. Steven Matz has had a really nice spring. Generally consistent as long as he can stay healthy. David Peterson is really interesting. Maybe getting the starting job there. It looks like it might go to Tyler McGill, who's down a couple miles per hour on his fastball, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Peterson get a really solid chance there. Stroman, if you've got your Ks already, the ratios are pretty nice for him. Ks are low, but that could be helpful. Erod and Matt Boyd are interesting. They both have increased velo and have looked really good this spring. So those are two guys. And then Ross Stripling is another one that I like too, who really was underrated last year. He pitched really well when he came on for it, but it's interesting to see like Brandon Pfaadt there, and he's not even making it, right? So
yeah, some of those drafts happened before he didn't make it though. So we'll see where that goes after this next weekend for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to clarify before, I'm not being disingenuous in terms of who I'm interested in and who I like in this area. Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of different pitchers, I think, depending on what your build is that you can kind of go with. And so I think that as well as like, it's kind of like Clark Schmidt. It's like, oh, Clark Schmidt I like a lot. Like he could take the next step. He's on the Yankees. He could do really well. He's also an ADP of 222, like that's a really valuable pick. There are some really good players going near him, and I'm just not sure that I'd be willing to do that. But I do like him a lot in terms of what he's been able to do. The velo was up a little bit. He incorporated the cutter, just stuff like that you really want to be paying attention to. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Zach Eflin since I blurted his name out yesterday on the Roto
That's so good. That's quite the Freudian slip.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so those are the guys within 200. I was into Kenta Maeda earlier, but his results just haven't been that good. I don't know if the velo is going to be there, but certainly if he can get going, we've seen the type of pitcher that he can be.
For sure. I like the Eovaldi call. Somehow Trevor Rogers is still interesting to me. I like Clark Schmidt. I'm with you there as well. Some others. I would love Tyler Mahle is something I'm keeping an eye on. Zach Eflin, like you mentioned as well. I love Cookie, Carlos Carrasco. I've been taking him in so many places. Big fan of him this season. Sean Manaea is getting my attention with the velo. That is something I'm monitoring. Still have not clicked that button, but the velo is, if I can see it like on one more spring start, he might end up on one of my last picks in an OC coming up. I'll say that much. So there's that. I love Mitch Keller. I always love Mitch Keller. You got to pay a lot more for him this year, but I'm a big fan. You mentioned David Peterson, another guy that I liked he was going later, but I'll still take him now because I think he's that good. I think he's a very, very good pitcher, especially if he ever figures out the walks, which were better last year. But, man, improve that even a little more, and that'd be nice. Tyler Anderson is intriguing at around 280 as well. So there's a lot coming later. Like if Rosie Contreras ever stopped walking, guys, that would be awesome. Ross Stripling, 100%. That's the dude I had rostered everywhere last year. So I'm in on that. Then you mentioned the Boyd and Erod. So it's a fun range. That's what I've liked about going through different ADPs is like there's good pockets of some really nice like stuff you can like I could live with taking like 3 pitchers in a row in that range and be pretty pumped to have them as like my 4th, 5th, and 6th, probably more my 5th, 6th, and 7th, hopefully starters. That would be a nice little wheelhouse to be in. I would not disagree with if it came to that on draft day. Let's talk.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about this range is like a lot of these guys are interesting because these are the guys that are showing something.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Where it's like these are the guys that were going in the 300s and DCs, and then they've had like a nice spring, or they've had a velo bump, or they've done something that has kind of like boosted their stock, whereas these other guys have kind of fallen off a little bit. And so, yeah, I just think that to me is kind of interesting. And looking at these guys is this is really like kind of like a pick your guy, pick what you believe in type of spot in the draft, in terms of who you're interested in going after at this point.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point on that one. Talk about picking your guys. Let's go ADP 300 plus. Now it gets into still some talent back here, but definitely murkier waters for a reason. That's why they're going past pick 300. But who are a few guys that stand out to you in this range?
Yeah, Eric Lauer is really good, or he's not really good, but he can be really good. Like
he's really good for post 300.
Yeah, we saw how dominant he can be, and towards the back end of last year, he actually showed some improvements. So I think that's kind of encouraging. I've kind of always been in on him. I was in on him last year. Aaron Savale is really interesting. With the pitch mix change that he had last year, he really kind of took it to the next level. Question is whether he can stay healthy and be consistent with that on a regular basis. I actually drafted Michael Wacha somewhere. I would not recommend doing that, but I think the Padres are playing at home against the Rockies, and I literally picked him so that I could play him them in that start. You're getting into your kind of spec territory. Jose Suarez is really interesting on the Angels. I think he had an underrated second half of last year where he really improved considerably on a lot of different metrics. Yeah, it's a little bit slim pickings here. Kikuchi's kind of one of those guys where you're like, oh, I want to believe
someday.
I want to believe what he's doing. I really want to believe in it. And maybe this year's different. He was really good skills wise towards the back end of last year. And the question is whether that was just a bullpen thing or not. Really, like that's the way that I think about it. Yeah, it's really slim pickings once you get later on, honestly.
Yeah, that's fine.
There's not a lot of guys. Like I really liked Ryan Pepio of the Dodgers, but it looks like he's injured, right?
Yep, he's banged up.
Yeah, he's banged up. So that was one that was definitely on my list of guys I would be interested in.
It's a lot more like spec closers back here almost.
Yeah, it really is. And filling out like your position guys, filling out your outfield if you can see all the green on there. A guy like Cole Irvin's kind of interesting because he's just one of those guys that's like been fine. Like he's been fine. And like there's something to be said for that, right? He doesn't walk guys, doesn't really strike him out either. Has like a high 3 ERA, like a decent whip. He's on a better team this year. Still a pretty good hitter's park. I don't know if I've seen his velo anywhere, but early in the spring they were saying that it was up a little bit.
Let's clarify. Irvin's fine in the 5th team. I'm not sure you need him in a 12th.
Oh yeah, you don't need him in a 12 at all. Yeah. We're talking like end of the road and end of the line here. Let's see, what did Irvin have? Like, what did he finish last year as? Sorry, just looking up here. Yeah, so like 3.98 ERA, 1.16 whip. I mean, that's great, for like where you're drafting the guy. He only had 128, strikeouts in 181 innings, but he did get 9 wins because he went relatively deep into games. So it's stuff like that, and you're just trying to balance that with some guys that are maybe like either home runs or nothing, And you can see that here, right? Like everybody's taking their closer specs in this range. So yeah.
Yeah, for me in this range, you mentioned Savali. I'm a big fan of what we're seeing from Aaron Savali. I'm always kind of a sucker for walking the right matchups, like you talked about. Alex Wood is a guy I'd get on while he's healthy. I think there's definitely something there. I love Jose Suarez, who you mentioned. I'm still a Brian Bayo believer, and seeing that he's healthy, might only miss one spot through the rotation. That makes me pretty giddy. So Brian Bayo might start going back up draft boards here in a minute. Now that we're seeing he's looking a little better, but yeah, Ryan Nelson is getting the spot in Arizona, if you believe in that. JT Brubaker, I like what we're seeing on a 15. He definitely has some legs in that format. Other than that, it's all specs. Like I like seeing Spencer Turnbull out there looking good again, but how much is he going to have after the Tommy John season? A lot of people like Graham Ashcraft. I'm still not there in a Great American Small Park fifth pitcher. That always concerns me a bit. So yeah, it's a little it gets bleak the farther down you go here, as you mentioned, but definitely someone that early 300s that I can live with and finish out my starting pitchers and be just fine with for sure. All righty, let's take the few listener questions we have here, and then we'll head on out for the night. And we'll start with doing K-Town Danny, or Doink Town Danny, sorry. Couple of close ADP guys. We kind of talked about these actually already. Who do you prefer in each matchup? You had Gausman and Castillo. We took Gausman. We didn't talk about this one. Blake Snell or Nasty Nestor Cortez. How do you look at those two?
I think I would probably.
Yeah,
Cortez is like so solid, but he's also a little injured, so he hasn't had that run. I actually haven't seen that much about Snell and how he's pitching, but he had a really strong second half of last year, so I'd probably lean Snell there.
Yeah, I'm leaning Snell. I've been taking him in drafts. I like seeing the way he finished the season. Like there's still that Cy Young pitchers there somewhere. And now he's on a team that at least if he's not walking the farm, will let him go deep into games. So it's like if he can continue to build off that second half, this is a dude that could be a big boy pitcher come the end of fantasy season. So I lean Snell as well. I'm with you on that one. Our buddy Ben Ted says, betting odds, what are the odds that Toby goes pocket aces this weekend? I know the answer to that, so I'm not going to comment on this.
I'd say it's 50-50, Ben. 50-50.
50-50 coin toss.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend for sure.
All righty. Well, that'll wrap us up, Toby. The last preview of the review of the season is in the books. Final thoughts as you head into a big Vegas weekend.
Well, thanks everybody. Thank you, Bubba, and thank you everybody else for coming along on the preview and then the re-preview journey the last few months. It's been a lot of fun. It's always helpful for me in kind of learning the player pool and getting great questions from everybody who's listening. So it's going to be fascinating. I mean, I think we've got the initial mains, but I think it's a whole different animal. I think when you get to Vegas and kind of what happens there, you generally have people who are pretty tuned in and are pretty, they have a lot of conviction, in where they see guys going. And so that can result in some really interesting drafts happening. So should be a fun weekend. Definitely going to miss you, Bubba. We'll get you there sometime soon, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks for everybody for listening.
Yep, it's going to be a blast. Can't wait to see the people on Twitter having a great time, seeing some more draft results, and then getting the 4-1-1 from one Toby G next week to see how things went and see how his winning teams look after draft night. So it'll be a great situation there. But until then, if you guys have any questions, hit Toby up on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. I'm at BDentric, and this was Bubba the Bat Flip, episode 151. Catch y'all next time.